Welcome to my YouTube channel, and this is Jacob Samuel. And today I will walk you through with Iata global indicators made simple. The following are a list of global indicators as enshrined by the International Air Transport Association. Number 1, WH, Western Hemisphere. 2, EH, Eastern Hemisphere. 3, AT, Atlantic. 4, SA, South Atlantic. 5, PA, Pacific. 6, PN, Pacific North or North Pacific. 7, AP, Atlantic Pacific. 8, TS, Trans-Siberian. 9, RU, Russia or Russian Federation. And 10 is Far East. So these are the list of global indicators that an IATA student has to memorize, as well as able to identify when a given itinerary is present. So to deal with the IATA global indicators, it is very important for us to first ascertain the 3 IATA areas of the world. The International Air Transport Association, for the purposes of fare calculation, has divided the world into 3 areas, and these areas are called TC1, TC2 and TC3. And TC stands for Traffic Conference, or to simplify, it's just called IATA Area 1, 2 or 3, or it can be also referred to as TC1, TC2 or TC3. And as you can see the map shown here, it's very easy to remember these areas. The whole of America is TC1. So you talk of North America, South America, Central America, and all the islands in the Caribbean Sea will constitute TC1. So when you come to TC2, the whole of Europe, the whole of Middle East, and the whole of Africa. And when you come to TC3, it starts with Afghanistan and you move all the way to the right to Japan, Korea, and move down to the Pacific, which is Australia, New Zealand, and all the islands in the Southwest Pacific. These constitute TC3. So to sum up, TC1 is all of Americas, TC2 is Europe, Middle East and Africa, and TC3 is starting from Afghanistan all the way to Japan, Korea, and further down to the Southwest Pacific Islands. So coming to the very first global indicator, which is quite simple, it's called Western Hemisphere. When a passenger's journey is wholly within TC1, that is area 1, it is referred to as Western Hemisphere. So it is important for students to note that it is ideal to learn the list of countries in North America, South America, and the Caribbean islands, failing which you will not be able to identify the global indicators. Now, citing examples here, example number 1, New York is in America, USA, it's in TC1. Miami is in USA, it's in TC1. Caracas is in Venezuela, it's in South America, it's in TC1. And Bogota is in Colombia, which is also in South America in TC1. Here, the entire journey comprises only cities in Area 1, so it is referred to as WH, Western Hemisphere. Coming down to example number 2, Buenos Aires, it's in Argentina, TC1. Panama City is in Panama, which is again in the Central American region, it's in TC1. And San Francisco is also in TC1 in USA, and Toronto is in Canada, which is also in TC1, and here it is referred to as WH, or the expansion as Western Hemisphere. The second one, Eastern Hemisphere. Again, it's quite simple. When the entire journey is wholly within TC2 or Area 2, it is referred to as EH. So all the cities on a given passenger's journey should be in TC2 or Area 2 to term it as Eastern Hemisphere. Going to example 1, London in UK, it's in Europe, TC2. Paris is in France, in Europe, TC2. Rome is in Italy, it's in Europe in TC2. And Dubai is in UAE, which is again in Middle East in TC2. So the entire journey in TC2, you call it EH. Example number 2, Cape Town is in South Africa, TC2. Cairo is in Middle East in Egypt. Though it is on the continent of Africa, according to Iata, it is in the Middle East. And Madrid is in Spain, it's in Europe in TC2. Amsterdam is in Netherlands, in Europe TC2. And Oslo is in Norway, again TC2. Now the entire journey comprises of cities within TC2, hence it is called Eastern Hemisphere. Again, Eastern Hemisphere, quite simple. When the entire journey is wholly within TC3, it is also referred to as EH. So here, when the entire journey is in TC2, it is EH. And when the entire journey is in TC3, also it is referred to as EH. Going to example number 1, Hong Kong, it's in TC3. Singapore is in TC3. Bangkok is in Thailand. It's in Southeast Asia. It's in TC3. And Colombo is in South Asian subcontinent. It's in TC3. And the entire journey comprises of cities in TC3. Hence, it is EH. And going to the next example, Sydney in Australia, Southwest Pacific, it's in TC3. Auckland in New Zealand, Southwest Pacific in TC3. Jakarta in Indonesia, part of Southeast Asia. And Tokyo, Japan, part of Japan, Korea. And Manila is in Philippines in Southeast Asia in TC3. And here also you see that all the cities on this journey are in TC3, hence it is referred to as EH. Now Trans-Siberian. Here the journey should involve travel wholly between a point in TC2 and a point in TC3, and travel from the last point in Europe is directly flown to Japan or Korea. It may sound a bit confusing, but in order to identify if it is a TS global indicator, one easy clue is you should have Japan or Korea on the itinerary. If Japan or Korea is not on the itinerary, Trans-Siberia is ruled out. You will have no option to use Trans-Siberia. So, the criteria to use Trans-Siberia is there should be Japan or Korea on the journey, 1. And 2, if the journey starts in TC2, then on this journey there should be a point in Europe where the passenger travels directly to a point in Japan or Korea. And if the journey originates in TC3 from Japan or Korea, the passenger should be flying to any point in Europe directly. Only then it can be termed as TS, and these are the two criteria. 1. There should be Japan, Korea on the journey, and the passenger should be traveling to and from Japan or Korea directly from a point in Europe. So, giving an example, Shanghai, it's in China, TC3. Hong Kong, it's in TC3. Tokyo is in TC3, Japan. Paris is in Europe. France, it's TC2. And London in UK, TC2. So here we comprise journeys, cities in TC3 and 2. And on this journey, you have Japan on the journey, Tokyo. And after Japan, the next city is Paris, which is in Europe. So from Japan, the passenger flies directly to a point in Europe. Hence, this is termed as Trans-Siberian. If you take an example between Tokyo and Paris, if you are going to put a city there as Bombay, then of course from Tokyo to Paris, the passenger is not traveling directly. You have Bombay in the middle. Then Trans-Siberia is ruled out. Coming to example number 2, Athens in Europe, Greece. Sofia is in Bulgaria. Seoul is in Korea. Manila is in TC3, which is in Philippines. And Singapore is also in TC3. So the journey is in Greece and the destination is Singapore in TC3. So between 2 and 3. And on this journey, first spot, if there is Japan or Korea on the journey, yes, there is Korea on the journey, which is Seoul, the South Korea. It's a capital. And look at the city before Korea. It's Sofia. And is Sofia in Europe? Yes. So from a point in Europe, the passenger travels directly to a point in Japan or Korea. Hence, this is a Trans-Siberian. So fares will depend upon the passenger's routing, because for a given journey of a passenger, this journey, the fare may qualify with a couple of global indicators. So if you look at a journey from London, if you're taking a journey to Singapore, there can be an Atlantic Pacific fare, there can be an EH fare, there can be a TS fare, Trans-Siberian. So the fares will depend on the global indicator. Now Russia or Russian Federation. When the journey involves travel wholly between a point in Russia and a point in TC3, and travel from the last point in Russia is directly flown to Japan or Korea. So you have a situation which is similar to an RU routing. But to use RU as a global indicator, the clue is your origin has to be Russia or your destination has to be Russia. If your journey starts in Russia, you should be going to TC3. And if your journey starts in TC3, you should be going to Russia. Russia should be your final destination. Only then there is a possibility of using RU. This is one criterion. The second one is, if the journey starts in Russia, then from Russia, the passenger should be traveling directly to a point in Japan or Korea to be termed as RU. And if the journey starts in TC3, from Japan or Korea, the passenger should be traveling directly to the point in Russia. So example one, Moscow, and the final destination is Hong Kong, which is in TC3. This is the first criterion. Is the journey starting or ending in Russia? Yes. Example number 1 starts in Russia and ends in TC3. Second, do you have Japan, Korea on the journey? Answer is yes. Osaka is in Japan. And the third criterion, from Russia, is the passenger traveling directly to Osaka? Yes. This is RU. Now, second example, Jakarta, it's in TC3, Manila TC3, Seoul is in TC3 Korea, and Moscow TC2. Now, is the journey starting or ending in Russia? Yes. Is the whole journey in TC2 and 3? Yes. Is there Japan, Korea on the journey? Yes, Seoul. And is the passenger traveling directly from a point in Japan or Korea to Russia? Yes. So this is termed as RU. Far East. When the journey involves travel wholly between a point in Russia or Ukraine and a point in TC3, and there is no other point in TC2 other than Russia, Ukraine, and it should also not fall under the RU routing, then you call it FE. Just like a Russian routing, the origin or the final destination has to be Russia, and the entire journey should be in TC2 and 3, and there should be Japan, Korea on the journey. So similarly, when you talk about the Far East, there is no need to have Japan, Korea on the journey, but all the cities should, after Russia or Ukraine, should be completely in TC3. There should not be any city in TC2. Everything should be in TC3. Again, I repeat, the journey should start or end in Russia or Ukraine. And if it starts in Russia, after Russia, all the cities are in TC3. If it ends in Russia, prior to Russia, all the cities should be in TC3. And here we term it as Far East. Going to example number 1, Moscow, Mumbai, Delhi, Bangkok. So here we see the origin is TC2 and the final destination is TC3. And we see that the journey starts in Russia and all other cities are in TC3. So this you call it FE. Citing the next example, Manila, Singapore, Colombo, Moscow. Now the journey ends in Moscow, and before Moscow are all the cities in TC3? Yes, this is Far East. But if you have a Japan or a Korea coming after Moscow or before Moscow, then the global indicator will be RU. So not to forget, if Japan, Korea is on the journey, there is a possibility of using RU. If Japan, Korea is not on the journey, RU is ruled out. Atlantic. This is also quite simple. When the journey involves travel between a point in TC1 and a point in TC2 or a point in TC3 via a point in TC2. So Atlantic, so here we see Atlantic. So either a journey can start in TC1 and go to TC2, or it can start in TC1 and go to TC3, but the passenger should be traveling between TC1 and 3 via TC2. Then we call it AT. AT means passenger is crossing the Atlantic Ocean. So whenever passenger crosses the Atlantic Ocean, the whole journey will have a global indicator as AT. So going to example 1, Miami is in TC1, USA. New York is in USA, TC1. Paris is in TC2, Europe. Kuwait is in TC2, Middle East. And Middle East, as we know, it's in TC2. So here the journey is crossing from TC1 to TC2, and from New York to Paris, which is TC1 to 2, the passenger will be flying over the Atlantic Ocean. Hence, the global indicator is called Atlantic. Now, if you look at this example 1, if you are going to have, after Kuwait, a city in TC3, which is Singapore, which is in TC3, the global indicator will still remain Atlantic because from New York to Paris, the passenger is crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Example 2, Singapore is in 3, Bangkok 3, Doha in 2, Middle East, Frankfurt is in Europe 2, and Detroit in USA 1. So again, now the journey starts in 3 and the passenger goes to 1. It is important to note that in example number 2, the passenger is not flying directly from TC3 Singapore to Detroit. Had the passenger flown directly from Singapore to Detroit, then the passenger is flying from TC3 to 1, then of course the global indicator AT cannot be used, and there we use the global indicator PA, which is Pacific Ocean. The passenger will be crossing the Pacific Ocean. Here the passenger crosses the Atlantic. Why? Because the passenger moves from Singapore and he travels westward to Bangkok, and again he moves to the left, comes to Doha, then he moves again to the west, Frankfurt, and it is from Frankfurt in Europe that he crosses to TC1, where the passenger crosses the Atlantic Ocean. South Atlantic. Another version of Atlantic, the passenger has to cross the Atlantic, but the passenger is traveling between a point in South Atlantic and a point in South Asian subcontinent or a point in Southeast Asia via a point in Central Africa, Southern Africa or Indian Ocean islands. This is a bit complicated unless otherwise you are very thorough with your sub-areas. Now when you talk about South Atlantic, it differs from South America. When you talk about South America, we are talking about a continent of South America. But when you talk about South Atlantic, they are referring to only a few countries in South America, which is Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and Paraguay. So your travel should originate in either of these three countries, and you should be traveling to a point in South Asian subcontinent or to Southeast Asia. And travel should be via a point in Central Africa, which is a sub-area, Southern Africa or Indian Ocean islands. So to use South Atlantic, you need to clearly identify the starting and the end point. If it is South Atlantic, the origin, the end point has to be South Asian subcontinent or Southeast Asia. And the wire points should be in TC2, but only cities in Central Africa, Southern Africa or Indian Ocean islands. You cannot have any city which is in TC2 outside these sub areas. You cannot have a city in TC2 which is in Europe. You cannot have a city in Middle East. You cannot have it. You cannot have a point in Kenya because it's in East Africa. You cannot have a city in Nigeria because it is in West Africa. The wire point should be these countries, Central Africa, Southern Africa or Indian Ocean islands. Now example number 1, Brasilia is the origin and the final destination is Singapore. So here we know origin is in Brasilia, which is in Brazil, and final destination is Singapore. So Brasilia is in South Atlantic, it's in Brazil, and Singapore is in Southeast Asia, and the passenger is traveling from TC1 to TC2, which is Johannesburg, and the passenger crosses the Atlantic 1 to 2, and the passenger is crossing via Southern Africa. Johannesburg is in Southern Africa, South Africa, that's part of Southern Africa as a sub area, and this is termed as South Atlantic. And as I've said earlier, you cannot have any other city in TC2. Had there been after Johannesburg, had there been a city in the Middle East, let's take Dubai, then the journey becomes Atlantic. Just Atlantic and not South Atlantic. Example number 2, Colombo, it's in Sri Lanka, TC3. Cape Town is in South Africa, TC2. Buenos Aires in Argentina, TC1. And Rio de Janeiro in TC1, Brazil. And now we will have a look between the origin and destination. Colombo, it's in South Asian subcontinent, Sri Lanka. And Rio de Janeiro is in South Atlantic, it's in Brazil. And the journey travels via Cape Town, and Cape Town is in South Africa, and hence this is termed as South Atlantic. And as I've said earlier, it is very important for you to know the sub areas. Now, when you talk about the sub area like South Asian subcontinent, we have Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, India, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. And when you say Southeast Asia, the list is very big. You have China, you have Indonesia, you have Malaysia, you have Singapore, you have Thailand, you have Myanmar, Vietnam. All these constitute Southeast Asia. So, driving home this point once again, your origin has to be South Atlantic, and your final destination has to be South Asian subcontinent or Southeast Asia. Had your final destination been Japan or Korea, you cannot use South Atlantic. If your final destination is Japan or Korea and you start your journey from South Atlantic, now South Atlantic is your origin, but your destination, Japan, Korea, is neither in South Asian subcontinent nor in Southeast Asia. The destination or the origin should be in these sub areas. Pacific. Passenger crosses the Pacific. So just like the Atlantic, this is very simple. When the journey crosses a point from TC3 to 1 or 1 to 3, you call it Pacific Ocean. When a journey involves travel between a point in TC1 and a point in TC3, it's called Pacific. So when I refer to TC1, please make sure that I'm referring to the Iata area, and I reiterate, TC stands for Traffic Conference. Traffic Conference areas, and that is what is called the Iata areas. Now, example 1, Los Angeles, TC1, Tokyo, TC3, Jakarta, TC3, Kuala Lumpur, TC3. So here the passenger flies from a point in TC1 straight to TC3. The passenger crosses the Pacific. So number 2, Colombo. It's in Sri Lanka, 3. Bangkok, Thailand, TC3. Beijing in China, TC3. And Vancouver is in Canada, TC1. And here from China, which is Beijing, a point in TC3, passenger flies directly to a point in Vancouver, which is TC1. Hence, the definition of the global indicator Pacific. So when you look at the fare table Any fare that is driven by global indicators will be highlighted next to each fare. Say, for example, you have a fare from London to Sydney, and next to each fare amount, the last column shows the global indicator. So there can be many Y-class fares. There can be 3 Y-class fares. There can be 3 first-class fares, or there can be 3 business-class fares. And next to each fare, the global indicator is specified. So the fare will depend on the global indicator. Now coming to Pacific North. So when we refer to Atlantic, there was Atlantic and South Atlantic. When you refer to Pacific, there is just Pacific and Pacific North. So Pacific North is a journey that involves travel between a point in Southwest Pacific, which is in TC3, and a point in South America, TC1, via a point or points in North America. Now here they have referred to South America and not South Atlantic. When you term the South Atlantic sub-area, SA, global indicator, it referred to as South Atlantic. And South Atlantic differs from South America, as I've explained earlier. When you say South Atlantic, it only comprises of 5 countries in South America. But when you say South America, it will also include all the northern part of the South American continent, like Venezuela and Colombia and those countries. So here travel should be between TC3, which is Southwest Pacific, and South America, and the passenger should be traveling via a point in North America. So example 1, Sydney, TC3, which is in South Pacific, Auckland in New Zealand, TC3, South Pacific, Los Angeles is in TC1, North America, and Rio is in TC1, which is in South America. So the journey originates in Sydney, which is in Southwest Pacific, and it is destined to Rio, which is in South America, and the passenger travels via a point in North America, which is Los Angeles. Hence, the definition of PN applies. Number 2, Lima. And Lima, it's in Peru, it's in South America, in TC1. Caracas is in Venezuela, TC1, South America. Mexico City is in North America, Mexico. Sydney is in Southwest Pacific, Australia. And Perth is in Australia, Southwest Pacific. So here the journey originates in South America and is destined to Perth, which is in Southwest Pacific, and the passenger travels via a point in North America, which is Mexico City. It's in North America, and hence the definition PN as a global indicator is used for this journey. AP. AP is also quite simple, like just your Atlantic and your Pacific. Here the passenger crosses both the oceans. So when a passenger crosses both oceans, it is going to be AP. And to have AP, the journey should be between 2 and 3. So if you have your origin as TC2 and your final destination is TC3, and in between you have cities in TC1, then the global indicator is AP. Example 1, Sydney, TC3, San Francisco, 1, New York, 1, and Rome is in 2. So Sydney to San Francisco, 3 to 1, as we learned the Pacific definition, any journey between 3 and 1 or 1 to 3 is Pacific. So here the passenger flies over the Pacific, and San Francisco to New York, the passenger is flying over the skies of USA, and after leaving New York, the passenger flies continuously for 7 to 8 hours or 9 hours over the Atlantic Ocean. So here the passenger crosses the Atlantic. So passenger crosses both the Atlantic and the Pacific. Whether you cross the Atlantic first or the Pacific first, the global indicator is always AP, Atlantic Pacific. Example number 2, Istanbul is in Turkey, 2, Montreal in Canada, 1, Beijing in 3, China, and Hong Kong in 3, China, a part of China. So TC2, passenger travels from Turkey and flies over the Atlantic Ocean and reaches Montreal. And from Montreal, the passenger continues and flies to Beijing, flying over the Pacific Ocean and then going to Hong Kong. And hence the term Atlantic Pacific, as I've said earlier, the global indicators that are easy to identify is AT, PA, AP, WH, and EH. When you refer to South Atlantic, Pacific North, Trans-Siberia, RU, and FE, there are certain conditions that the passenger will have to fulfill in order to use those global indicators. I hope this video has been useful for you. And if you're happy with this, kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel. And the link is provided. In the meantime, bye bye. Thank you for watching.